Beneath the unassuming streets of Northgate High, a storm of whispers and stares followed Nia wherever she walked. Clad in a motorcycle helmet she never removed, she was an enigma, a symbol of defiance against the privileged elite who sought to tear her down. But behind that visor lay a secret too dangerous to reveal, a family's past wrapped in exile and survival. When her tormentors crossed the final line invading her last sanctuary, Nia found herself at the center of a war for her identity. What began as a high school bullying scandal would soon unravel into a battle against systemic complicity in the long reach of authoritarian cruelty. This isn't just a story of a girl in a helmet, it's a story of a girl who refused to bow, a girl who turned silence into a weapon, and a world forced to reckon with the power of her truth. The bell at Northgate High screeched, a sound that always felt less like a call to learning and more like a starting pistol for a race Nia was forced to run every day. She adjusted the full face, smoked visor motorcycle helmet on her head, the clicks of the strap lock echoing in the sudden quiet of her small apartment. Outside, the world waited, a world of stares, whispers, and a relentless curiosity she fought to starve. Nia walked the 6 blocks to school with a practiced, steady pace, her backpack a familiar weight, the helmet a necessary shield. It was a ludicrous sight of a girl in a school uniform and a heavy, professional-grade helmet, walking, not riding, but it was her only armor. At Northgate, a sprawling campus of manicured lawns and historic brick buildings predominantly populated by the white and wealthy, Nia was an anomaly, not just for the helmet, but for the mystery it preserved. The whispers began the moment she stepped onto school grounds. "There's Helmet Girl. What is she hiding under there? I heard she's, horribly disfigured." The theories were as wild as they were cruel, but they were better than the truth. The truth was far more dangerous. Her destination was the library, her only sanctuary before the first period. There, she could sit in a secluded carrel, the helmet still firmly on, and lose herself in the quiet company of books. Only one person knew her secret, her friend, Kenji, a quiet boy who understood the art of being invisible. He would sometimes slide into the chair opposite her, offering a silent nod that spoke volumes of solidarity. Her homeroom teacher, Mr. Harrison, was another ally of sorts. He was a wary but kind man who, after one pointed but respectful question about the helmet at the start of the year, accepted her non-answer and simply ensured no other staff member bothered her about it. But her antagonists were not the staff. They were a clique of popular, privileged students led by Ashley, a girl whose blonde hair and surgically perfected smile were the very image of Northgate's elite. Ashley and her friends Jessica and Chloe seemed personally offended by Nia's existence. Her anonymity was an affront to their social order. Where everyone's value was on public display, they saw her helmet not as a shield, but as a challenge. The confrontation happened in the cafeteria, the school's roaring, chaotic heart. Nia always sat alone at a small table near the emergency exit, a habit born from a primal need for an escape route. She had her lunch spread before her, a simple meal from home, and was trying to read a book propped against a carton of milk. The helmet making the angle awkward? Well, look what we have here." Ashley's voice sliced through the din. She stood over Nia's table, flanked by Jessica and Chloe. The trio formed a human cage. A hush fell over the nearby tables as students turned to watch the unfolding drama. This was the kind of spectacle that fueled the school's gossip mill for weeks. Nia's entire body went rigid. She did not look up. Her hands, which had been resting on her book, curled into tight fists on her lap. She focused on the text, willing them to disappear. "Still hiding." "I see," Jessica sneered, leaning in close. "What's the matter? Afraid to show everyone how ugly you are?" "My bet is she has no hair," Chloe added, laughing, "or a massive scar." Nia remained silent, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, the weight of their collective gaze pressing down, suffocating her. Mr. Harrison was on lunch duty, but he was at the far end of the vast room. Breaking up a food fight, Kenji was home with the flu. She was completely, utterly alone. Ashley's smile tightened, her frustration growing at Nia's non-reaction. You know, we're just curious. It's a matter of school safety, right? We don't know who you are under there. You could be anyone. She reached out a hand, her long manicured nails aiming for the helmet's clasp. Instinct took over. Nia shot up from her seat, knocking her chair over with a loud clatter. Her hands flew to her helmet, protectively cupping it. "Don't touch me," she said. Her voice muffled but firm. It was the first time many of them had ever heard her speak. Her defiance was like gasoline on a fire. "Oh, she speaks." Ashley's voice was laced with venom. "Then you won't mind showing us your face?" She lunged. Nia stumbled backward, but Jessica and Chloe were already moving, blocking her path. They grabbed her arms, their grips surprisingly strong. Nia struggled, a surge of panic overriding her disciplined control. This was it, the moment she had dreaded for years. Ashley's hands were on the helmet now, yanking at it. The force of it snapped Nia's head back. She cried out, a raw sound of fear and desperation. The cafeteria was a coliseum, and they were all cheering for the Lions. Ashley gave one final, vicious tug. The helmet didn't come off. The chin strap was too secure, but the force of the assault sent Nia crashing to the floor. Her lunch tray went flying, its contents splattering across the linoleum. The carton of milk burst, soaking her uniform. Laughter erupted from the surrounding tables, loud, cruel, and thunderous. Nia lay on the floor, surrounded by spilled food and mockery, her hands still clamped to her helmet as if it were her own skull. She was shaking uncontrollably. Through the smoked visor, the world was a blur of jeering face and pointing fingers. The humiliation was a physical blow, searing and absolute. In that moment, she wasn't just a girl with a secret. She was a spectacle, an object of derision. And as she lay there, a tiny, almost invisible pendant, a silver lotus blossom, slipped out from under the collar of her shirt, unnoticed by anyone but her. It was a link to the very thing she was hiding, a secret far more profound than the beauty she concealed, a secret that, if revealed, would not just lead to humiliation, but to a danger she knew these privileged children could never comprehend. The cold, unforgiving linoleum of the cafeteria floor faded away, replaced by the humid, heavy air of a monsoon evening in Saigon. Nia was 9 years old, and she was not hiding. She was vibrant, a whirlwind of laughter and energy. Her face, even then, possessing a striking, symmetrical beauty that made strangers turn and smile. Her father, Khoi Pham, a celebrated journalist and human rights advocate, called her his Doa Hua Sen, his lotus blossom, a symbol of purity rising from the murky depths. He would often say her smile was his most potent weapon against the darkness he fought with his words. Their home was a hub of quiet defiance, filled with the scent of brewing jasmine tea, the clatter of her father's keyboard, and the hushed, urgent voices of fellow activists who came and went under the cover of night. Nia understood, in the way a child does, that her father's work that was important and dangerous. He wrote articles that exposed corruption, that gave voice to the silenced, and that called for a democracy the ruling regime relentlessly crushed. Her mother, a gentle but resilient woman, managed their lives around this constant threat, creating a bubble of love and normalcy for Nia. The bubble burst on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival. The streets were alive with glowing lanterns, the air thick with the sweet smell of mooncakes. Nia was holding her father's hand, her face alight with joy as she watched the lion dancers. Her beauty was particularly radiant that night, her features framed by the colorful lights. A photographer from a state-run newspaper, there to capture the festive propaganda, took her picture. He knelt, smiled, and told her she was the prettiest girl in all of Saigon. Days later, her face was on the front page, but the headline was not about the festival. It was a vicious, state-sponsored smear campaign against her father. The article branded him a traitor, a foreign puppet funded by Western enemies. And there, next to his name, was the large, full-color photograph of Nia, her innocent, joyful face used as a tool of intimidation. The implicit message was chillingly clear. We know who you are, we know who you love, and we know where to find them. That photograph turned her from a child into a target. People on the street who once smiled now looked away, or worse, glared with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Her mother started walking her to and from school, her hand holding Nia's with a desperate tightness. The hushed voices in their home became fraught with panic. Friends of her father began to disappear. The breaking point came a month later. Her father had just published a damning expose on illegal land seizures by a high-ranking party official. The retribution was swift and brutal. One evening, while her father was out meeting a source, uniformed security police stormed their home. They wore no insignia, their faces grim and impersonal. They ransacked the house, overturning furniture, tearing books, smashing the cherished family altar. Her mother shielded Nia in a corner, but one of the men grabbed Nia, his rough hand gripping her arm. He held her face close to his voice a low growl. Your father needs to learn his place. Such a pretty face. It would be a shame if something happened to it. He let her go, but the threat lingered in the air, thick and poisonous. When her father returned to find his home destroyed and his family terrorized, the fight went out of his eyes, replaced by a profound, hollow fear. That night, he made a decision. They had to flee. He had contacts, a network of international human rights organizations that had been offering him asylum for years. He had always refused, unwilling to abandon his country. But now his country was threatening to take his daughter. The escape was a blur of terror. Whispered plans, fake documents, a harrowing journey in the dead of night. They arrived in the United States as political refugees, with nothing but a single suitcase and the ghosts of the lives they had left behind. They were settled in a quiet, anonymous suburb, the very opposite of the vibrant, chaotic city that had been their home. Here, her father's reputation meant nothing. He was just another immigrant, working a low-wage job to support his family. His powerful voice silenced by circumstance and a new, gnawing fear for his family's safety. The regime that had driven them out had a long reach. They knew that operatives were present even here, in the land of the free, ready to monitor, intimidate, or worse, Nia's beauty, once a source of pride, was now a dangerous liability. Her face was still out there, linked to her father's name on dark corners of the internet. It was a beacon that could lead their enemies straight to them. And so, the hiding began. At first, it was simple things: hats, sunglasses, oversized hoodies. But as she entered high school, where social lives were lived online and every face was cataloged on social media, they knew it wasn't enough. The idea for the helmet was hers. She saw a motorcycle rider one day and realized it was the perfect disguise total: impenetrable anonymity. It was a prison she built for herself, but one she chose over the cage of fear. Back on the cold floor of the Northgate cafeteria, the memory receded, leaving a familiar ache in its wake. Nia pushed herself up, her body trembling, not just from the humiliation, but from the resurgence of that old, deep-seated terror. Ashley and her friends saw a weird girl, a social outcast to be tormented for their amusement. They had no idea they were playing with fire, that their cruel game of unmasking her was a direct threat to the fragile peace her family had sacrificed everything to build. She clutched the silver lotus pendant under her shirt. It had been her father's last gift before they left Vietnam, given to her as they huddled in the back of a smuggler's truck. Be like the lotus, my daughter, he had whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Rise through the mud, bloom in the darkness. Never let them see you wilt. Forcing herself to her feet, ignoring the stares and the spilled food, Nia walked away, each step a silent vow. They would not break her. They would not uncover her. She would endure. Life after the cafeteria incident settled into a new, more menacing rhythm. The open mockery was replaced by something far more insidious. Naya felt like a ghost haunting the halls of Northgate, perpetually watched, her every move scrutinized. She tried to reclaim her routine, to find normalcy in the rigid structure of the school day, but the system itself seemed to subtly work against her. In her French class, Madame Dubois, a woman who prided herself on pedagogical precision, insisted that proper pronunciation was impossible without seeing the student's mouth. Nia, I cannot assess your labial consonants if you insist on wearing that, she would say, her tone a mixture of academic frustration and thinly veiled disapproval. It didn't matter that Nia's written work was flawless. She was marked down for participation. A coded penalty for her otherness, the true architects of her misery. However, were Ashley and her friends, emboldened by the lack of consequences for their public assault. They escalated their campaign, moving their harassment from the physical world to the digital one. They created an anonymous Instagram account at Northgate Helmet Girl. It was a digital shrine to their obsession. They posted candid photos of her, snapped from a distance, Naya walking down the street, Nia reading in the library, a zoomed-in shot of her hands. Each post was a violation, a new piece of her stolen for public consumption. The captions were a mix of feigned concern and outright cruelty. Spotted our favorite enigma. Does she ever take it off? We're just worried about her. What if she can't breathe in there? The page became a sensation. The comment sections were a cesspool of speculation and cyberbullying, a digital mob echoing the laughter of the cafeteria. Students she had never even spoken to now felt they had a right to an opinion on her existence. Theories about her identity became a school-wide game. Was she a burn victim? A member of a bizarre cult? A celebrity in hiding? The wilder the theory, the more popular it became. The helmet, once her shield, was being twisted into a symbol of freakishness, a justification for their relentless persecution, recognizing the escalating danger. Naya knew she had to act. She took screenshots of the most abusive posts and comments and scheduled a meeting with Vice Principal Thompson. She sat in his sterile office, the helmet feeling heavier than ever, and laid out her case with a calm, clear voice. She explained the targeted harassment, the unauthorized photos, the psychological distress. Mr. Thompson listened with a practiced, professionally detached air. He steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. I understand this is upsetting. Naya, he began, his voice smooth and placating. But you have to understand, social media is a bit of a wild west. It's hard to police what students do outside of school hours. They are taking pictures of me on school grounds, Nia countered, her voice steady. The harassment is centered around my experience at this school. Yes, but Ashley and her friends deny creating the page, he said. A statement that was technically true but utterly disingenuous. And as for the attention you're receiving, you must admit, your choice of headwear is highly unconventional. It naturally provokes curiosity. If you were willing to integrate a little more, to perhaps remove the helmet, I'm sure this would all die down. The words hit her like a physical blow. The system wasn't broken, it was designed this way. It protected the aggressors, the popular, the ones who fit the mold. Her safety was conditional on her conformity. He wasn't seeing a student being harassed. He was seeing a problem that refused to solve itself by becoming normal. She was being blamed for her own persecution. She left his office with a profound sense of hopelessness. The institution that was supposed to protect her had just confirmed she was on her own. The online campaign soon spilled back into the real world in a more dangerous way. One afternoon, as Naya was walking home, she noticed a familiar car, Ashley's white convertible, driving slowly behind her. It was packed with Ashley's friends. Their phones all pointed in her direction. They were following her. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her practiced composure. They couldn't see where she lived. They couldn't know. Her home was the final sanctuary, the one place where the helmet could come off. She ducked into a narrow alleyway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew these back streets better than they did. It was the geography of escape. She scrambled over a low fence, ran through a series of connected backyards she'd mapped out for just such an emergency, and emerged onto a different street 2 blocks away. She didn't stop running until she was certain she had lost them, leaning against a wall, gasping for air. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. The threat was no longer contained within the school gates. It was following her home. That evening, Kenji found the Instagram page. His quiet fury was a stark contrast to the loud cruelty of the online mob. He didn't say a word to Naya, but he immediately began his own form of quiet resistance. He spent hours reporting the account, citing Instagram's policies on harassment and bullying. He reported individual posts. Then, using an anonymous account of his own, he began to plant seeds of doubt in the comments. This is creepy. Why are you all obsessed with stalking a girl? Leave her alone. She has a right to privacy. This isn't school spirit. This is bullying. His was a lone voice against a chorus of derision. But it was a start. It was an act of loyalty that Nia, who later saw the comments, would never forget. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by the ghost of a terror she hadn't seen in years. The haunted look of the man who had found his home ransacked in Saigon. He looked from the screen to his daughter, his gaze falling on the helmet that sat on her desk. The shield they had thought was so clever now seemed like a flimsy piece of plastic against a relentless, insidious new enemy. They're following you, he asked, his voice barely a whisper, the question heavy with the unspoken fear of what that could lead to. I lost them, she said, trying to sound reassuring, but his face was grim. The past was never truly past. It was a hungry ghost. And these children, in their ignorance and privilege, were ringing a dinner bell. Maybe this was a mistake, he said, his voice heavy with despair. Maybe there is no safe place. The question hung in the air between them, not if the helmet was enough, but if they would have to run again. The illusion of safety in their small apartment had not just faded, it had been violently ripped away. Fear was no longer a ghost, but a physical presence, a cold weight in the air that made her father, coy, move with the haunted urgency of a man reliving his worst nightmare. He had abandoned his search for jobs in other states. Instead, late one night, Nia found him at their small kitchen table, a worn manila envelope open before him. Inside was a bundle of cash held by a brittle rubber band and a list of old contacts, the kind of emergency resources kept for a life perpetually on the verge of collapse. The sight of it, the quiet finality in her father's posture, sent a shard of ice through Nia's heart. This was the same desperate energy, the same sense of surrender, that had saturated their last days in Saigon. History was coiling to strike again, but as she watched her and her father's shoulders slump in defeat, a different feeling began to burn through her. It was a white-hot, defiant anger, an inferno that consumed the edges of her lifelong fear. She would not run. She would not allow these privileged, cruel children to wield the same power as the totalitarian regime that had stolen her homeland and silenced her father. The two were different in scale, but not in their essence. Both thrived on the persecution of the vulnerable for their own gain. The catalyst had been the latest post on the notorious social media page dedicated to her torment. It wasn't just the grainy, zoomed-in photograph of her apartment building's drab front door. It was the comments beneath it, the casual cruelty that revealed the true nature of the threat. Getting warmer. Time for a house call from the anonymous account. And worse, a reply from Chloe's public profile. Maybe we can find out what her dad does for a living. Some kind of low-wage janitor, lol. The classist, racist barb was aimed not just at her, but at her father, at the sacrifices he had made. They had crossed the final line. The digital stalking had breached the walls of her sanctuary, and in doing so, had threatened the very man she was trying to protect. That evening, Naya did not go to Mr. Harrison asking for help. She went to him with the cold resolve of a general planning a counteroffensive. She found him in his empty classroom, the setting sun casting long, skeletal shadows across the rows of desks. Without a word, she laid her phone on his desk, the screen illuminated by the damning post. "They found where I live," she said. Her voice was steady, stripped of all panic and emotion, leaving only a hard, diamond-like clarity. "Vice Principal Thompson told me my helmet was the problem. What do you think he'll tell me now?" "To move." She looked at him, and for the first time, he could feel the force of her will, an almost physical pressure in the room. "This isn't about bullying anymore. Mr. Harrison, this is a sustained campaign of targeted harassment, and our school administration is complicit through willful ignorance. You see the system? It protects the powerful and silences the victim." She leaned forward slightly. "So the question is, are you a part of that system, or will you help me burn it down?" The ultimatum hung in the air, sharp and revolutionary. It was a demand that he risk his career, his comfort, his quiet life, to choose a side. Mr. Harrison stared at the picture of her front door, then back at the invisible but fiercely present student before him. He saw the rot she spoke of, had seen it fester for years, the toxic entitlement of students like Ashley, nurtured by the school's cowardly deference to their wealthy, powerful parents. In Nia's radical defiance, he didn't just see a student in need, he saw a moral reckoning, and perhaps a chance for his own redemption. "They've gone too far," he said, his voice a low growl of conviction, "and their arrogance is the weapon we'll use against them." Their conspiracy grew to include Kenji, who, upon seeing the post and the threat to Nia's home, shed his quiet demeanor for a cold, focused fury. The plan had to be surgical, public, and undeniable. Kenji's first task was to find their digital war room. It was a high-risk gamble. He would use the school's own Wi-Fi network to intercept data packets, hoping to capture the login credentials for the shared cloud drive he was certain they were using to coordinate their attacks. It was a serious crime, an act that could get him expelled and Mr. Harrison fired. The perfect stage for their gambit was the annual parent-teacher open house, Northgate's most sacred evening of self-promotion. The school would be packed with parents, board members, and faculty. Mr. Harrison, as a trusted veteran teacher, volunteered to manage the audio-visual presentation in the main auditorium. Ashley, the personification of Northgate's success, was the keynote student speaker. On the night of the open house, the auditorium buzzed with polite chatter and the smell of fresh floor polish. Ashley, radiant in a designer blazer, glad-handed parents and administrators, her own influential father, a local real estate developer, looking on with pride. In the projection booth at the back of the hall, the air was thick with tension. Nia sat in the last row of the auditorium, a shadow among shadows. Ashley stepped to the podium, beaming a practiced, confident smile. "At Northgate," she began, her voice smooth and clear over the sound system, "we believe in creating a community of absolute inclusion, unwavering support, in total transparency." In the booth, Kenji's screen flashed. "I'm in," he whispered, his voice tight with adrenaline. Jessica just logged into their shared drive from her phone. "I have full access." He looked at Mr. Harrison, who gave a single, sharp nod. "Now," Kenji typed a command. On the massive screen behind Ashley, the looping slideshow of Northgate's achievements vanished. It was replaced by the stark, white interface of a cloud storage folder. A chat log appeared, projected 10 feet high for all to see. "Ashley P. Official U. Guys, see the pic of her apartment. So grimy. Jessica W. Total dump. Her dad probably cleans toilets for a living. Chloe B. I dare you to ring her doorbell next time, lol." A wave of confused gasps swept through the audience. Ashley's smile faltered. She glanced behind her, her face draining of color, but the worst was yet to come. A video file on the drive opened automatically, the screen filled with Ashley's own laughing face, recording herself in her convertible. "Okay, guys, Helmet Girl is just up ahead," her voice, dripping with malice, boomed through the auditorium. "Let's see where the freak lives." The camera panned to show Nia walking down the street, and then back to Ashley and her friends, their laughter cruel and echoing. The video ended. leaving Ashley's jeering face frozen on the screen. A profound, absolute silence fell over the hall. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and polite hypocrisy out of the room. Ashley stood at the podium, a statue of her own making, publicly executed by her own words. Her parents stared, their faces collapsing from pride into masks of abject horror. Vice Principal Thompson, standing near the stage, was a thundercloud of pure fury and frantic political damage control. The power structure had not just been challenged, it had been spectacularly detonated in front of the very community it was designed to impress. The auditorium was a vacuum of stunned silence. Ashley Preston stood at the podium, a marble statue of humiliation. Her own laughing face projected on the screen behind her like a cruel digital ghost. Vice Principal Thompson, his face a mask of panic, lunged for a microphone. A technical malfunction, he yelled, his voice straining to sound authoritative. We apologize for that highly inappropriate content. Please remain calm. He gestured wildly to the projection booth. Shut it down now. But the screen did not go dark. It flickered, and the video of Ashley was replaced by something colder, more sinister. A map of the streets between Northgate High and Nia's apartment appeared. A red line tracing her daily path. Geotagged photos marked her progress. The final pin was dropped squarely on her building. The chat log reappeared. The comment branding her father a low-wage janitor now highlighted in a damning red. The evidence shifted from cruel mockery to a calculated campaign of stalking and hate. Phones across the auditorium were raised, their small red lights blinking on, transforming the shocked parents into a jury of witnesses. From the projection booth, Mr. Harrison's voice boomed, amplified and clear. This was not a malfunction. Mr. Thompson, this was the presentation of evidence. Evidence of a student being stalked and targeted with racist abuse. Evidence you were presented with weeks ago and chose to bury. Thompson's head whipped around, his face contorted with rage. You are fired. Harrison, you and that boy, you violated school policy security for what? Harrison's voice shot back, crackling with righteous fury. For exposing a hate crime you helped cover up Ashley's father. Mr. Preston finally erupted. A man used to buying his own reality, he roared, "This is slander, an attack on my daughter. I'll sue you. I will sue this school into oblivion." He charged toward the stage, a bull of wealth and privilege ready to trample everything in his path. The chaos peaked, and then it broke. A single deliberate sound cut through the shouting, the tread of footsteps in the center aisle before every head turned. It was Nia. She walked with an unnerving, regal calm, her helmeted head held high. She wasn't a victim hiding in the back anymore. She was a warrior claiming the battlefield. The crowd parted for her as if she were royalty. Her silent, inexorable advance drained the rage from the room. Mr. Preston's threats died in his throat. Thompson's orders faded into silence. Ashley looked up from her mother's arms and whimpered, a new and more primal fear in her eyes. Nia stopped at the foot of the stage, a silent, armored accuser whose presence was more powerful than any shout. Her smoked visor reflected the distorted faces of the men who had wronged her. That is enough. The voice was female, sharp and absolute, near the front. Eleanor Vance, the powerful chairwoman of the Northgate School Board, rose to her feet. Her cold, furious gaze pinned Thompson and Preston in place. Both of you will be silent. Now. The two men froze, instantly neutered by a superior power. Ms. Vance's eyes found Mr. Harrison in the booth. You are not fired. You will come down here and detail the evidence you presented to this administration. Then her gaze settled on Nia, not with pity, but with a look of profound, steely respect. And this young woman will be heard. The board is now in session, in public, with witnesses. The power structure of Northgate had not just been challenged, it had been publicly dismantled. And the girl they tried to make invisible was now the most powerful person in the room. The auditorium, once a stage for sanitized school pride, had become a courtroom, under the unblinking glare of the house lights and 100 phone cameras. Eleanor Vance, the school board chairwoman, wasted no time. Her voice was sharp, a scalpel cutting through the wreckage of the evening. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Preston, take a seat in the front row. Now, Sana. The command was not a request. The two men, stripped of their power, complied, their movements stiff with shock and fury. Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Vance called out, her tone now one of firm invitation. The floor is yours. Harrison descended from the projection booth, his face grim but resolute. He stood before the assembled parents and faculty, a stack of printed emails and screenshots in his hand. He laid out the timeline with methodical precision. He described Nia's initial plea for help. He detailed the evidence of the anonymous social media page. Then he delivered the killing blow. I brought these concerns to Vice Principal Thompson, Mr. Harrison stated, his voice ringing with conviction. I warned him that the targeted harassment was escalating, and his professional advice to this student, a victim of stalking, was, and I quote, "Your choice of headwear is highly unconventional. If you were willing to integrate, I'm sure this would all die down." A wave of outrage swept through the parents. The words, so callous and dismissive, hung in the air, a testament to the administration's systemic failure. Thompson sank lower in his seat, his face ashen. He had been condemned by his own words. When Ms. Vance gave him a chance to respond, Thompson's defense was feeble. He stammered about protocols, lacking concrete proof, and the difficulty of policing social media. His excuses sounded hollow, pathetic even to his own ears. He was a man watching his career disintegrate in real time. Suddenly, Mr. Preston shot to his feet, unable to remain silent. This is a witch hunt. My daughter is a teenager. She made a mistake. You can't ruin her life over a stupid prank. Vance turned her glacial gaze upon him. Mr. Preston, your daughter's stupid prank involved the systematic stalking of a classmate, racist and classist harassment, and creating a hostile educational environment. I suggest you consult your lawyer, because I assure you the school district will be consulting ours. Sit down. He collapsed back into his seat as if struck. The auditorium doors at the rear of the hall swung open, and two uniformed police officers entered. Their presence solidified the severity of the situation. The whispers in the crowd died instantly. The officers conferred quietly with Mr. Van, who pointed them toward the evidence still frozen on the screen, and then toward Mr. Harrison, who handed them his file. After a brief, grim-faced review, one officer approached the front row where Ashley, Jessica, and Chloe were huddled together, weeping. Ashley Preston, Jessica Wallace. Chloe Bannon, the officer said, his voice calm but firm. Carrying in the tense silence, we have multiple witness statements and clear digital evidence of criminal harassment and stalking. Please come with us. He didn't put them in handcuffs, a small, final courtesy, but the public humiliation was absolute, as he escorted the three sobbing girls up the aisle and out of the auditorium. A new sound began. It started with one parent, then another, then a dozen, a slow, steady, building applause. It wasn't for the girls' downfall. It was for Mr. Harrison, for Kenji, and for the silent, helmeted girl who had refused to be broken. The community was not just responding, it was choosing a side. As the officers departed, Miss Vance stepped forward once more, effective immediately. She announced, her voice leaving no room for appeal. Vice Principal Thompson is suspended, pending a full board investigation into his conduct. Harrison will be taking on his duties in the interim. The applause erupted again, louder this time, a resounding vote of confidence that sealed Thompson's fate. Amid the unfolding drama, Nia remained at the foot of the stage, a statue of quiet vindication. She watched as her tormentors were led away, not with triumph, but with a somber gravity. This was not a victory she had sought, but a battle she had been forced to fight. The helmet remained firmly in place. Her ultimate secret was still her own, but the first layer of justice had been served. The immediate threat of regret was gone. In its place, however, was a new unknown landscape. The entire school, the entire community, now knew the story of the helmet girl. The whispers would change. The stares would be different, but the attention on her would be more intense than ever. The battle was over, but the war for her anonymity, for her family's safety, was about to enter a dangerous new phase. The aftermath of the open house was a whirlwind. Northgate High became the epicenter of a local media storm. News vans parked on the manicured lawns outside the school, and reporters swarmed the campus, hungry for details about the helmet girl case. The story had all the elements of a viral sensation: privilege, racism, cyberbullying, and a dramatic public takedown. Ashley Preston and her friends were charged as juveniles with stalking and harassment, their wealthy parents' attempts to quash the story only fanning the flames. Vice Principal Thompson quietly resigned before the board could officially terminate him. A disgraced footnote in the scandal. Naya, however, vanished from view. She did not return to school in the days that followed. The intense public scrutiny was a new kind of prison, one her helmet couldn't protect her from. She and her father stayed home, the curtains drawn, watching the story of her life unfold on the local news, narrated by strangers. Her father, Coy, was caught between profound relief and a deep, gnawing anxiety. The immediate threat of Ashley was gone, but now Naya's story, even the sanitized, helmet-centric version of it, was public knowledge. Their carefully constructed anonymity had been shattered. It was Mr. Harrison, now the acting vice principal, who breached their self-imposed isolation. He came to their apartment not as an administrator, but as an ally. He sat in their small living room, the helmet resting on the coffee table between them for the first time, and looked at Naya with deep respect. "The world is telling your story, Nia," he said gently, "but they're getting it wrong. They're calling you a victim, a symbol. They're missing the point. The only person who can tell it right is you." His words resonated with a truth Nia was beginning to understand. Hiding had been a strategy for survival, but it had also ceded control of her own narrative. The world was defining her. It was time to define herself. She owed it not just to herself, but to her father, whose own voice had been stolen from him. With the help of Kenji and Mr. Harrison, she made a plan. She would not give a tearful interview to a news crew. She would not become a daytime TV sob story. She would reclaim her story on her own terms, using the very tool that had been used to terrorize her, the internet. Kenji secured a new anonymous blog platform for her, routing it through layers of security to make it untraceable. Nia began to write. She wrote not as the Helmet Girl, but with a new pseudonym, the Lotus. The name was a tribute to her father, a symbol of the beauty and resilience that rises from the darkest of places. Her first post was titled, "Why I Wear the Helmet." She did not reveal her identity or her family's political history. That secret was still too dangerous. Instead, she wrote about the universal experience of being judged, of being made to feel like an outsider. She wrote about the insidious nature of bullying that masquerades as curiosity, and the institutional cowardice that allows it to flourish. She described the feeling of being watched, photographed, and dehumanized, and the choice she made to erect a shield not of weakness, but of strength. She framed it as an act of self-preservation in a world that relentlessly demands conformity. "You see a helmet and you assume I am hiding from you," she wrote. "But what if I am protecting myself from a world that refuses to see past a face? What if this isn't about what you see, but about your insatiable, aggressive need to see my helmet is not the problem? Your entitlement to my identity is..." The post was explosive. Mr. Harrison, using his new official school email, sent the link to every parent and student in the district under the subject line, "A required reading on digital citizenship and empathy." Kenji shared it with influential anti-bullying activists and journalists he followed. Nia had transformed her personal trauma into a universal message. She was no longer just a local news item. She was the anonymous voice of a global movement. She followed up with more posts, analyzing the systemic nature of the abuse she faced, dissecting the roles of privilege, power, and institutional complicity. She never showed her face. Her power was in her words, in her anonymity. She had taken the very thing they tried to weaponize against her, her invisibility, and turned it into her greatest strength. In their small apartment, she would read the comments to her father. His eyes would fill with tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming pride. He saw his own legacy, the spirit of his journalism, reborn in his daughter. She was giving voice to the silenced, just as he had tried to do. The regime in Vietnam had taken his platform, but they could not extinguish his fire. It now burned brighter than ever, illuminating the world from a small, anonymous blog, a digital lotus blooming in the darkness. The global success of the Lotus blog was a double-edged sword. While it created a powerful shield of public support, it also painted a massive target on Naomi's back. The blog's eloquent and fierce advocacy for the silenced, combined with its potent symbolism, did not go unnoticed by the regime she had fled. In the cold, sterile offices of her homeland's state security apparatus, online surveillance teams flagged the blog. The writing style passionate, articulate, and defiant reminded them of a dissident voice they had crushed years ago, the journalist David Pine. The connection was tenuous at first, a professional curiosity. But then they cross-referenced the timing of the blog's emergence with international news. They found the stories of the helmet girl at Northgate High. They found Ashley Preston's name, and through her, the town. It didn't take them long to pull the old file on David Pine and his last known location as a political refugee. And in that file was a photograph of a beautiful 9-year-old girl using sophisticated facial aging software. They created a projected image of what that girl might look like today. The hunt was no longer digital. The threat materialized on a gray, overcast afternoon. David was leaving his job at a local logistics company when a man in a simple dark jacket fell into step beside him. The man looked ordinary, forgettable. He spoke in quiet, placid English, but with the unmistakable accent of their homeland. The lotus blooms beautifully in America. "Mr. Pine," the man said, his voice a calm river of menace. "But its roots are still in our soil. It would be a great shame if those roots were to be poisoned." David's blood ran cold. He tried to walk faster, but the man stayed with him. "Your sister's family as well." I hope the man continued conversationally. He held up a phone. On the screen was a photograph taken that same day, David's young nephew, playing on a familiar street in the capital city. The message was as clear as a blade to the throat. "Silence your daughter, or your family back home will pay the price." The man smiled faintly, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. David stumbled home, his face ashen, the ghost of a terror he thought he had escaped clutching at his heart. He found Naomi in her room, writing her next blog post. "You have to stop," he pleaded, his voice cracking, revealing the threat. "We have to shut it down. We have to leave. Now, yeah." The final, most terrible conflict was not with bullies or school administrators, but with the father she loved. He was ready to run again, to erase their lives once more to protect the family they had left behind. Naomi looked at her father's terrified face, and her heart broke. For years, she had hidden to protect him. Now he was asking her to hide to protect others. But she realized with devastating clarity that this was the regime's true power, not in its overt brutality, but in its ability to turn love into a cage, to force the silence to police each other. Hiding was not a strategy anymore. It was a surrender. "If I stop, they win." "Dad," she said, her own voice thick with tears, "they will have silenced you, and now they will have silenced me. When does it end?" That night, she made a choice. She would not surrender. She would not run. She would disarm them. She sat at her laptop, took a deep breath, and began to write her final post. It was titled, "My name is Naomi Pine." She uploaded a current photograph of herself, taken with her own phone. Her face, luminous and unadorned, looked directly at the viewer, There was no helmet, no shield. There was only a calm, unwavering strength. For years, I have been known as the Helmet Girl, and recently, as the Lotus. She began. Today, I am choosing to be known by my real name. I am the daughter of David Pine, a journalist who was persecuted by the authoritarian government of our homeland for speaking the truth. We fled to escape a regime that uses threats and intimidation to crush dissent. I wore a helmet not because I was ashamed of my face, but because my face was a weapon they could use against my family. She told the whole story, the persecution, the flight to America. She detailed the harassment at Northgate, framing it as a microcosm of the same power dynamics she had fled the powerful targeting the other to maintain their dominance. And then, she delivered the final, brilliant counterstrike. This week, an agent of that same government threatened my father. They showed him a picture of our family and told him to silence me. This is how they operate in the shadows, using love as leverage. So I am stepping out of the shadows. I am making my story, my father's story, and my family's safety a matter of public record. If any harm comes to my relatives back home, my aunt, my uncle, my cousins, the entire world will know who is responsible. You can no longer use them as a weapon against me. My voice is now their shield. The post detonated across the internet. It was a confession, a manifesto, and a masterstroke of political jujitsu. The story was instantly picked up by major international news outlets. Human rights organizations, which had followed the Lotus, now had a name, a face, and a specific, actionable case of transnational repression. Embassies were called, diplomatic statements were issued. The authoritarian government, caught in a blinding global spotlight of its own making, was forced to issue a clumsy denial, an implicit guarantee of the family's safety. The next morning, Naomi Pine walked onto the Northgate High campus for the first time without her helmet. She held it in her hand, not as a shield, but as a relic. The students, who had all read her story, parted for her. The whispers were gone, replaced by a stunned, respectful silence. They were not looking at her beauty, which was undeniable. They were looking at her courage. She had faced down school bullies, a corrupt administration, and an authoritarian government. She had found justice not by hiding, but by revealing her truth in the most radical way possible. She had reclaimed her father's legacy and honored his name. She was the Lotus, risen from the mud, blooming not in darkness, but in the full, brilliant, and unforgiving light of day. Her message was clear and would echo forever. The only true safety lies not in being invisible, but in being so profoundly and courageously seen that they dare not touch you.